Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Chris Rossini, our co-host. Chris, welcome to the program.
Good morning, Dr. Paul.
Very good, very good. You know, Chris, we try to keep our eyes on what the Fed's been doing, and the chairman of the Fed was in Dallas a couple of days ago, and he had a meeting with Kaplan, who's the president of the Dallas Fed. And afterwards, he took some questions. There was sort of I thought, a pseudo press conference, and there was a discussion. At least Powell made the headlines. You know, he got some attention out there, and generally speaking, he was painting, a pretty good picture, which one would expect. The Fed never goes around telling the truth, and telling us what we have to worry about. But he announced that the economy was doing well, and the markets didn't seem to shake up the markets very much, even though the stock markets and financial markets have been a little shaky. But at least when he released his statement, didn't seem to disturb anything. But there's been a lot of comments about his meeting and whether or not they will figure it out. He's saying we have everything under control. We know exactly how wide open the spigot should be, and we're in really good shape. And even the vice chairman has agreed with that. So I think we'll have to keep an eye on that, and the markets will tell us what's really going on, because they can tell us what's going on and how wonderful it is, but quite frankly, they're usually wrong.
Oh, absolutely. They would have to be, because if they're right, that would mean that manipulating the economy and central planning works. And we would have to close our show down. Yes, Powell said, and I'll quote him, he said, "I'm very happy about the state of the economy right now. Our policy is part of the reason why our economy is in such a good place right now." So, Dr. Paul, what really is happening, though, is they just created another massive bubble. We went through the stock market bubble, the housing bubble, and now this is even bigger than those two. So he's just praising the bubble economy, but we know what comes right after the bubble, don't we?
That's for sure, and he was reassuring everybody else that was listening to him that his job, he has a responsible job, and that is to serve the public, take care of the public, which means absolutely nothing. If he wanted to tell the truth, he says, what our job is to take care of the banks, and make sure they get a good deal, and make sure the military industrial complex and the people who need cheap money will be able to continue. But he was wanting to take credit. He said things are going well. The stock market was doing pretty good, but the market's doing well. The typical economic statistics that they report. So he wants the credit, for that. And I've always made the assumption that when it looks halfway decent, the Federal Reserve always took credit for it. If there's boom times, in a recovery period, they're printing like crazy, and people feel better, and the market picks up. It's all our fault, all our responsibility. We did a good job, and we deserve the credit. But the amazing thing is, they expect us to not understand why bad times come. Because out of the clear blue, it has nothing to do with the Fed. It was somebody making too much money, or manipulating the market, or oil prices are up, or wages are too high, or something. They'll come on there. So then there's a downturn, and they feel like their job is to come to the rescue. And they certainly came to the rescue in 08 and 09 for a problem they created. The rescue operation wasn't very immediate. They didn't get any response for years, but they expect to get credit when it's good, and they also want to get credit when it's bad, and they tend to improve it a little bit. So they want good grades for the economic planning, but that's their job. They're economic planners more so than ever before, compared to what it was like when they first started in 1913, which was sort of going to be the backup for the banks to try to keep banks from going bankrupt and keep things going. But now it's much bigger than that. It got very big during the 9/11 or the 2008 and 9 rescue operation, when they created that system of QEs and bailed out a lot of people, as there was so much nobody still to this day know exactly who were all the beneficiaries.
Yes, I don't know how they can say with a straight face that they serve the public, because they literally rip off the public. And I'm not being hyperbolic. I mean, they tax us we have no say in it, because it's not direct. They don't tax us directly like our income taxes and when we buy something at the stores. It's indirectly. When they create money out of thin air, it diminishes the value of the money that we have. So prices go up, and we're paying more. It's not like we're all getting raises every single day, but they're constantly cranking out new money, depreciating what we have, and that does not serve the public. That's ripping us off, literally.
And Powell was trying to describe, his job. It's difficult, but he's doing a great job, according to the insiders. But he believes what his job is, and that he's doing it, is to prevent inflation, and also to stop the bubbles from forming. But the whole thing is he thinks he can and claims he can, that he has to wind down the balance sheet and raise interest rates so it doesn't really hurt anything. So there isn't any of these problems that crop up. But I think that is an absolute dream on his part, and they always talk about that, where they can do this and control things, but they have no control. Because here he's talking about, we'll do it in such a way that we won't cause inflation and we're not going to cause a collapse and all these things. But he never talks about where the inflation came from, where it is now, and why we haven't dealt with it. And that's the balance sheet, and that's the trillions of dollars that they created, during this recent bailout. And that's the inflation that creates the money supply, which has to be worked out. It hasn't been fully discounted. I don't think gold has discounted the amount of money the Fed created. I think it's gold is waking up right now and starting to discount that massive amount of money. But that's the thing that they can't control, because they can, even we can't predict either. They can create a lot of money and lower interest rates, and we know what kind of trouble's ahead, but not exactly where. Nobody knows where the money will go, or how the low interest rates will affect the economy, in which places, where the malinvestment will be, and where the excessive debt will be. But the one thing for sure, in an economy like we have, and with the Fed that we have, one thing we do know is it does enhance debt. And even every once in a while, our government and our Congress will talk about, we have to deal with this debt problem because they're dealing with the budget right now. They're pretending they're very concerned now. How are we going to handle the debt? But they will never connect that with the Federal Reserve, because we wouldn't have this $1 trillion debt per year, and it's predicted now this $1 trillion deficits per year will go for 2 or 3 years, and who knows how much longer. But none of that would happen if we had an inability, if there was no central bank that could create money out of thin air to cause the moral hazard of the politicians, the people, and the banks, everybody else wanting that money created for all their special interests. But they believe that they can keep doing this and ignore the deficit and say, well, we're doing a good job. We have a pretty good balance here between slowing the economy too much or stirring up inflation. So we will just keep the balance and keep doing what we're doing. Well, I think we can be pretty sure, and I think there's a lot more people in this country, and even on Wall Street now you hear them talking, yes, but there's something brewing out there, something big, and there's some big corrections come. And even the conventional investors out there, the establishment investor, some of them know exactly what's happened, and they're starting to get out of the marketplace. And I think that's why we've seen this tremendous early adjustment for the stock market, because the stock market will adjust. It went up too much when they were inflating, and it's going to crash down lower. But which day it's going to happen, how fast, that's yet to be seen.
Yes, and for my closing thoughts, Dr. Paul, we had the midterms recently, and you mentioned it on one of the shows afterwards, and I agree with you. With the Democrats winning the House, the Fed may have gotten off the hook when the bus comes, because Trump was hounding the Fed and he hasn't said anything since. Because now, when the bus arrives, he has a perfect scapegoat. He had the greatest economy until the Democrats came along, and it's much better for his supporters who may not know the Fed, what it means, what they do, but they do hate the Democrats. So it's a perfect thing, and it would be a shame if that's what happens, because he should continue to keep the spotlight on the Fed, because that is the source of our economic woes. And at least here on this show, we'll keep the pressure on them.
Well, yes, and others are coming to support what the chairman had said, and the assistant Federal Reserve Chairman Clarida came out, and he's only been in that position a short time. And he thinks that they've met this neutrality where it does no harm, not too much stimulation, and not too much of a cause of contraction. And he thinks it's quite all right, but never does he mention, or anybody else mention, the real problem, which has been ingrained, and it's the inflation and the disturbance of the interest rates and the money supply. But it's interesting also, there has been some challenges. The Wall Street Journal has come out and said maybe Trump is right. Maybe Trump is right to go after the Fed and say, hey, you guys are raising interest rates much too fast. What do you think about it? They are so far removed from what the market would do that it's silly to say, well, yep, the Fed's working too rapidly and raising interest rates too much. But the president of the Minnesota bank has come up and said no, he agreed with Trump. The Wall Street Journal said they agree with Trump. They're moving too fast. So there is some disagreements there, and there should be, because there's no way to know. I think one of the most interesting questions I get, because I don't have a perfect answer for it. Well, I have a perfect answer long term, but they'll say, Ron, okay, you're complaining, you're never happy with the Fed. Okay, if you were there, what would you do with these interest rates? And should they raise them faster or slower? And how do you do that? And I said, you can't answer this, because I don't believe in intervention. Just hands off as soon as possible, which is find out what the market wants. But that causes some ramifications and some liquidation of debt and malinvestment that nobody wants to put up with. So they're not going to allow the market place to work and allow the market to make these determined. There's no right answer for that. You can't say, well, I know exactly what they should do. Every 6 months, raise the interest rates a certain percentage point. And long term, the market does rule out, the Fed is so-called tightening, which isn't really the case, but interest rates have gone up a little bit. But ultimately, it will be the people who demand dollars or are willing to buy our debt, if they really, really back off, or if the price inflation gets out of hand, it will dictate interest rates. And even now, credit cards and other companies that have more independent control of interest rates, they're much higher than a 2 or 3%. And those very low interest rates are the interest rates that the banks have to pay, to get money out of the Federal Reserve, which is a real gift. And that's why they do well in good times and in bad times, and get bailed out if they get into trouble. But I don't think that we learned a whole lot from yesterday, other than its continuation of the status quo, and they will make excuses. They're more into economic planning than ever before. It started off as a little bit of backup for the banks and corporations in the early years, but now they're really in big business, controlling the entire economy. I thought it was interesting. There was an article in our local papers here that Powell, after he left Dallas, came over here and had a meeting in Houston, and he went over to the Fifth Ward, which is an area that has been in the news for decades, a impoverished area where they wanted to rebuild and get the government involved and this sort of thing, and rebuild it. And it's interesting that Powell came and he toured it almost like a politician, and he wanted to assure him he had talks with the people who are managing this area, and he says, I want you to know that we're on your side and we're going to do everything that we can to help you. Well, right now, part of the recovery which has failed came from this community redevelopment grants, and they have that. And just think of the power the Fed have. What does he have in mind? What can he do secretly? How can they channel funds? How can they help a bank that might be in that area? But and they probably have done this a lot in the past because they're into everything. But I've never remembered this. Possibly it could have happened, but I thought it was rather blunt for him to go there and walk around this impoverished area and say, we're here, we're going to take care of you, almost like the politicians are supposed to do, and whiff away all the damage done by a hurricane, and play that game. But anyway, he's reassuring him he'll take care of it. But the only tool he has is the destruction of the monetary system, and that is print more money, manipulate interest rates, and hope everything will get better. But they are between the rock and the hard place. For them to say that we have it in perfect balance, that we don't have inflation nor recession, and we're doing a great job. They worry a little bit about total growth around the world, but they're not likely to tell us the truth. But the truth will get out. The truth wins out in the end. And I think more people are interested now in hearing the truth and watching what the Federal Reserve does and how they manipulate things. I think as far as people looking at the Federal Reserve, it's so much better than it was when I first went to Congress in the 70s. Nobody thought about it or cared about it. A few people wrote about it on the financial pages. But now I think a lot of average people know about it, and they know that it's a system that protect the special interest, and they've been doing it for a long time. So the message is the Federal Reserve does not have answers. They have a tool of propaganda which they hope will work for them. They also want credit for the good times and credit for the bad times when they get them out of the bad times. But they can't solve the problems. These problems are unsolvable with the current system of spending, deficit financing, and monetary mismanagement and economic interventionism. They just don't have the answer until they think about not only auditing the Fed, getting rid of the Fed, and talking about free market economics and property rights and contract rights. I'll tell you what, they can't solve these problems. And the opportunity, unfortunately, isn't going to come until the whole thing falls apart. Somebody asked me yesterday in a meeting, they said, well, can something be done to work toward an answer for this? I said, yes, but they're not going to. They never do it. They never will because of the political pressure not to bite the bullet and say, look, somebody's going to suffer if you turn off the money spigot. So no, it's going to be the continuation of spending, the destruction of the currency, and we do have inflation of commodity, consumer goods and producer goods. That will get worse, and of course, we always have the inflation to deal with because the likelihood of having deflation where they shrink the money supply, very, very unlikely. They're going to continue to inflate until they destroy the money. Not a bad thing, but since there's more people interested in this subject than ever before, I become somewhat optimistic that maybe the rebuilding and the restoration of a sound currency might come out all right, because we cannot put up with this. This is sort of, what Zimbabwe and Venezuela is going along with. What are they doing to try to fix it? They're not doing a thing, but they need and will need a new monetary system and more respect for market economies and personal liberty. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.